Just want to say hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Rob and I really appreciate your comments and questions that we've both gotten over the last week. We've really tried to incorporate those into this half an hour together because we want it to be as meaningful as possible. I'm Dr. Jen. If you don't know me, I'm a nurse practitioner and a teen risk expert. I'm interviewing my colleague, training partner, licensed therapist, the list can go on and on, really good friend, Rob Robinson. Chris and I have worked really closely together over the last 7 years. We've had the privilege of traveling across the US, working with lots of diverse professionals and parents in different communities from Alaska to Mississippi we were in right before COVID, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, just really learning from our professionals and parent participants as much as we're teaching them about their kind of lived experiences, their cultures. It's really helped in my continued growth and understanding, and it's provided an opportunity for Chris and I to really talk about differences and have authentic conversations around uncomfortable topics like injustice and racism, and really share those ideas and resources with each other. And I'm super excited that Chris can share those with you today as well.
Okay, so just wanted to share some of my experiences just having this conversation. I have 4 kids. It's a conversation about race is something that starts very early in my family. It did when I was younger, and it's not even something that you necessarily think about. It's something that just happens on a regular basis. But I've also had a lot of experience in having conversations with adjudicated young men that are people of color that are in the juvenile justice system. And I've had a lot of those conversations. Very uncomfortable at times, but something that I've had to do a lot of. And now my oldest son is 16, and that has opened up a lot of different doors where the necessity to have a conversation, him being driving age and things of that nature, has been really, really important. So I'll share some of those experiences, some of the strategies that I've used to try to start the conversation, which is usually like the biggest hurdle. And hopefully some of that can be helpful to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of thinking about white privilege in different ways is that we don't, as a white mom or a white parent, we don't think about that, like having to have those conversations. That's one of those pieces that we really do need to think about and understand how to do that, how to bring it up. So I'm excited that today we're really going to focus on those strategies and how to bring up that conversation, and when the conversation gets started, how to really ask questions and use strategies to open the door to it versus kind of shut down our teens. And where we're going to start, we have some questions that were sent in. The first one is, what are your thoughts, Rob, on starting the conversation with our tweens and teens around racial justice? How do we do that?
Well, I feel like this is something that's come up quite a bit given our current climate, which makes a lot of sense. I think everybody wants to have this conversation, and it's just really hard to figure out what to say or how to start. The first thing I think that people should keep in mind is really having the talk is usually not a good idea. Just think about the birds and the bees talk that you have with your parents, or the talk about drugs, that one important talk that gave everybody involved anxiety. It usually is not effective in trying to do what we want to do, which is to make our teens feel comfortable, make sure that they're making safe choices, things of that nature. It's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves to, how do I teach my child about racial justice? So instead of having the talk, it's really about finding natural ways to start the dialogue. And it doesn't have to be a 30-minute conversation every time. It should be something that goes on a regular basis. And it doesn't always have to be you doing the talking. You know, that's one of the other mistakes that we make, is we lecture because we have so much we want to give our kids. They are not listening past the 30-second mark. If you've been talking for 15 minutes, even if they're being respectful, they have lost a bit of what you said at that point. The attention span is not that long, especially for teenagers, given, you know, phones and TikTok and all these funny short videos. So it's really about having open dialogue. Start by asking your child an open question, just an open-ended question, like, Have you heard of racial justice? And if so, what is that to you? What does that look like? You know, and is that important to you? And then, do you mind if I share like what I think it is? And then you give them that information. You explain that to them. You can look up the definition if you want, and have some dialogue. And that's how you get them to start thinking about these topics. And that's how you create a pathway to have these ongoing conversations versus I need to sit down and talk to my child about racial justice because I want them to play this particular role. And now I'm overwhelmed because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And I've been talking for an hour. And we all know if we care about our kids, we've all lectured them at some point and they've forgotten everything that you've said. So I try to stay away from that when I'm having these more difficult, important conversations.
Mm-hmm. So really the important piece is finding those brief kind of ideas and the values you want them to take away and remember in that like less than a minute time frame.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So that is definitely a strategy. We've had some questions come in just related to very specifically, like how do white parents and parents of color begin that conversation on race and then integrate that into just our regular conversations that we might have when they get home, maybe over dinner, as we're watching some type of movie, TV.
So I think that setting the stage is important. Most kids don't want to be pulled to the table. Put your phone away. I need to talk to you. Anytime you have regular activities going on, if you're cooking together, driving in the car is really good. It takes a lot of pressure off when you're not staring at each other. They can take in a little more information, even if the music is on. Just don't have it so loud that you're yelling, but just dialoguing in those moments. I think that starting the conversation when it comes to African American parents, when we're talking to our kids, I think our intentions are specific and a little different. The conversations that we're having early on about race is how important it is that we know we have to work a little harder to see success. A very common term you hear with Black kids is you got to work twice as hard to get the same opportunity. So just seeing that if you want to be successful, which most people want their kids to be, the type of effort you have to put in when it comes to school, when it comes to anything where the world sees you. The other very, very important piece, which I think is front and center right now, is how do you be safe as an African-American child? I think very specifically African-American boy. I remember very early on that I wasn't allowed to play with toy guns outside. I can have them inside, but if they were a certain color and you couldn't tell it was a toy immediately, that is a safety intuition that parents have that you can't do that. And I didn't necessarily understand why could my friends do it. But I say the same thing to my child. And it's the fear that they will be looked at differently, wouldn't be given the same grace that's probably a toy, that's probably just a kid. And it's a real fear that a lot of parents have. So explaining that, so you find out very early on that you are a little different at 5, 6, 7 years old. And it's hard to understand why, but that's the conversation that we have. I think, and I'm not a white parent, so I want to say that, and none of these conversations are all inclusive. These are different ways that different parents can have conversations, and it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. These are just more tools or more strategies to add to your tool belt. I think white parents come from a different lens that believe in racial injustice and they want to try to fight for positive change, is more telling their kids about their privilege and that other people's experiences are probably going to be different than ours because of their race. Not to necessarily say that we won't have a difficult time, that you don't have to work hard. It's not that. It's that understanding that there is a layer of systemic racism that impacts a group of people differently. And you may have the opportunity to have some impact on that when you see it. And we can get into that when we start talking about some of the skills to try to address it. But very early on, getting them to understand that there's a system in place that causes this, not necessarily individuals that are just mean to other people.
And I feel like as a white parent, sometimes we feel like we don't understand, which we don't. We weren't raised with that idea of white privilege. I had a mentor early in my career that gave me lots of different books to read. We had one-on-one sessions talking about it, really helped me understand and grow. But if you don't have that, it's very, like you said, under the surface. It's kind of under a veil where if you're not aware or thinking about it, you just kind of go on with your day. And that's part of our privilege, that we can do that. So just saying to our teens or even younger tweens, like, hey, I'm learning this with you. What can we do together that would help us both grow? And we could have a conversation around maybe a documentary we watched or a book that we're reading, something like that. And rely on kind of us to search those things out.
I 100% agree. There's so many resources right now that would trigger those conversations and are very educational. If you just turn on Amazon Prime, there's a list of Black Lives Matter movies that are free for that very reason, to start to initiate these conversations that people haven't been having as easily.
And not to feel like I have all the answers. So we're growing together. And that can be very powerful for teens as well, that you're saying, we're both in this and we're both growing and learning.
Absolutely.
So kind of taking a little bit of another look at that, we had some questions around white parents raising Black children and how they can have that conversation, especially when they have Black children and white children, and how those two sons, that conversation is different and how that feels as a sibling.
I think one of the things sometimes is difficult as parents is to let our kids know that we don't have all the answers. I don't know, but it can be very powerful when you let your kids know that you're human. And if there is something that I'm just not familiar with because I lack experience in that, so if I walk around this world with a different type of privilege and I have a child that doesn't have that privilege, it can be a father talking to a daughter. There's privileges that men have that women don't. You can say, I don't know what it is to be a woman. I am very conscious and I'm trying to educate myself to know like the things that you may go through and things that you're going to have to deal with. And that's the same thing for a white mother talking to a Black child. I'm conscious that there is some type of systemic racism that you're facing, that you're growing up in. I don't know what that feels like. I don't always know what it looks like. It can be very subtle, but I want to be a part of this process and figuring it out and being supportive of you so that you know that I got your back, which that's what mothers want to do. I think that is really important to extend your networks. Take a look at your personal friends. Take a look at the people that you work with. How much diversity are you around? We, just as human beings, flock to what is very similar to us, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. If you want to be able to understand the experience of others, though, you need to be in more close proximity. And it's not about having that one friend that I can always talk to, but being able to have shared experiences in your children as well. And when you do that, it can definitely increase your knowledge base as well as your understanding of how to have this conversation with your son who might be a different race than you.
Absolutely. It's kind of thinking ahead and planning for and seeking out some of those situations or seeking out some of those relationships. So kind of talking about planning, the other piece that comes up that causes a lot of anxiety for parents is when your child comes home or your teen comes home and says something that you feel is racist. And you're like, oh my God, I raised you better than that. Like, this should not be coming out of your mouth. So that is not the correct way to respond to our teens, even though it's going to be our natural parent response. So how do we manage that? Because it's not just what we're teaching our kids, it's what they're seeing on TV, it's what they're hearing at school, it's social media, it's, peers. So we have some influence, but we don't have the influence.
Absolutely. And even more so when you start talking about teenagers, because their peers are so important to them and they are getting so much information so quick with social media and smartphones. Understand that you're going to be just a piece of the information that they're getting to influence how they kind of respond and what things that they learn. But if your child comes home and he says something that is emotionally charging to you, let's say we're talking about race specifically because that's the topic at hand. Um, like Jen said, I think the worst thing to do is to have an emotional response. And like, you can never say that. What is wrong with you? Those type of responses to teens makes them dig their heels in. Autonomy is something that's extremely important at these ranges as far as between like 12 and 17. And I want to be able to have some choice in how I talk and what I do. And if somebody challenges that, I go the opposite of what they're saying just so I can have the autonomy. So if you come in and you basically label them as wrong, don't ever do that. I want to hear that in my house. Although you may feel that way, it can have a reverse effect. It's really about first checking yourself, always checking to see what is your intent. I want to make sure that my child has a different view. If that's your intent, then you come in calmly and ask an open-ended question. Can you explain that term to me and where you got it from? Because I'm very curious. I know it's not something that we say here. And what do you think that it means? Let them explain. Empathize that, oh, okay, that's something that you heard about and you think it means this. Can I share where I know that it came from or where I learned about that word? And then you give them some context and then you give them a chance to respond. And this is the open dialogue about race and these difficult conversations that you always have, because then you can have some impact at 13 and at 17, because this is a normal conversation. It's not like, oh, snaps, dad wants to talk to me about race. No, it's like we talk about everything. And I share something and I can openly tell them like what I feel about it. And then they can openly share me their thoughts. And that's how you keep your influence with your children. Mm-hmm. If you shut them down, you start to lose influence because they start to listen to you less. Now you may follow your rules because they don't want consequences, but as soon as you leave, you best believe that they're saying like, mom don't understand, dad don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're really planting a seed and you're kind of fertilizing that, watching it grow over time, coming back to the conversation. And you can start that at any age. So Absolutely. It doesn't be, if you like weren't aware, didn't think about it, everything that's happening now in the world is sort of bringing that to light. Like, wow, I need to really find out more, learn more, understand. It's fine to start now versus starting younger as well. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, but
yeah. I've made some mistakes with Christopher Jr. I'm not making with Cameron. Better believe it.
The first child always gets the mistakes. Then
he's resilient though. He's
right?
He's an amazing team, thank God. But yeah, he definitely we made all our mistakes with him for sure.
And really, Chris and I are joking around, but as parents, we come from a place of love and protection. So we really aren't making mistakes with them. We just learn more as we get older and Absolutely. Get more experienced. We get more tools and things like that. But yeah, we feel like it can be mistakes sometimes. So what resources would you suggest for parents? Where can parents kind of turn to for help or support on this topic and having those conversations?
Well, yeah, like I said, I think seeking out diverse groups, different networks. I think right now is such a rich time with there's so much information out there about what you can do, what steps you can take, how to be active. I think that really taking the opportunity to watch some of these movies, read some of these articles, let that generate conversation. Our kids are at home for the most part. They've been at home for a very long time. They have a lot of free time. It's okay to have a movie night where it's the family and we're going to sit down and watch this. Those things plant seeds and also provides you with a different perspective about what I should do next. Because I hear a lot of that, like I want to be active. I'm getting a lot of messages from people like, all right, what should I do? Yeah. And I don't have all the answers. You know what I mean? It's, sometimes it's just about the opportunity. It might be on a very big scale. You might organize a rally. You might organize a protest. It might be on a very small scale. You may hear a friend say something that comes from a place of ignorance and not hurt, and you might correct them. You might add something like, do you know where that derived from? You know what I mean? So it can be on so many levels that you can try to address racism or systemic racism, that you shouldn't feel like the overwhelming feeling that I'm going to fix this tomorrow and I got to do some grand action, because it's not always possible.
Mm-hmm. I think along those lines, some of the comments that are coming in are really around like, how do you address when it's a close relative, a close friend that are making comments, and it just puts you in a place of like, what do I say to help them think through it versus
Right.
make them angry. It's kind of that balancing act.
It is. It is. My first, like, and I don't give a lot of advice as a therapist, but I would say, first of all, I wouldn't be arguing with people that I can actually have a conversation with on social media. It is the most toxic, very difficult way to get your point across. And it gets very, very emotionally charged. And remember, your goal is not just to fight, but to get people to see your perspective.
Mhm.
We really have to start listening with empathy. And that's on all sides. That doesn't mean I agree with your perspective, but I want you to be able to hear my story relative to how I see it. And then take that information and we create a story together on how we see things. And if we can get to that place, I think there'll be a lot more sympathy. I think that people who agree that there are social injustice issues are very charged as well. We should be, because I agree with that.
Mhm.
Um, and when we're saying these are issues, some people take that as an offense, that we're saying you're the issue, and a system is not a person. And it's privilege. That's the thing that really stresses people out, and these arguments start to happen. You really are complicit in keeping that system in place. And so that's where there becomes a struggle. But if I wouldn't have those conversations online, listen with empathy. If someone says something you disagree with, still hear and try to understand where they are coming from. And then ask them to hear where you are coming from. And then see how those two kind of play together. It's really important that we try to get an understanding. If I can move the needle just a little bit for you to see my perspective, that's a win versus you're dumb. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You're going to go from like here to here in our conversation. Yeah. You might
Right.
move this little bit and then next
Absolutely.
time and next time. And it's really role modeling is what you're talking about. If you're listening to them, you're kind of role modeling that, okay, share that point with me. And when you start to share, what are some things that you could say or respond if they're just like totally shutting down, not listening to kind of now your time to share your perspective?
I think you have to be patient. You have to be patient. This understanding that this topic is about being involved in a process. These conversations are processes. And when you want to share your perspective, you really want to take your time and not do all the talking. Don't don't push and say that it's either this or nothing, because it's very hard for people to jump from one perspective to the next. If I feel like I only have two choices, I'll just stay where I'm at, where I'm already more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely a range, and there always is in situations like this, and we ultimately want to all get to the same spot. At the same time, being patient when people don't see our perspective 100% is, I think, extremely important in the process.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one other question, and I've seen a few comments related to how we talk about the protests with teens, and also this time that Rob and I have spent has really been around kind of that tween and teen, 9 to 18-year-olds,
Mhm.
but maybe we'll have an encore like younger child, because it is a different approach and different strategies and things that you would
Yeah.
share.
Mhm.
But how would you address the protests with teens? And then if you could say just a few things about kind of that maybe early tween, like 8 to 10-year-olds.
Absolutely. I think that first I would ask them what are their thoughts. I really want to get where they're coming from. What story are they telling themselves about what they see? Is it scary? Do they think that these are bad people and these are good people? And what experiences are they making out of what they're viewing first before I make impressions or assumptions? And then I would add a bit based on my see. In this is important. I'm talking strategies of how to have a conversation. I'm not telling everybody to share my beliefs, but my beliefs as far as the protest, what I'm going to share with my kids is that the protests may look scary, the systematic response to when things happen to people of color has been poor. This is someone, this is an expression of a people that is just so frustrated they don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my younger kids, say you're talking 7 or 11 years old, they know what that feels like. My younger son has tantrums when he just doesn't know what else to do. That will put it into that perspective. It doesn't mean that the tantrum is okay. It doesn't mean that it's not okay, but we need to figure out what has frustrated you so much and to deal with that. That would be my analogy on how to teach my kids about what's going on. No, I don't want you to bang your head. No, I don't want you to fight, kick, and scratch. But I'm not going to just tell you, you better not do that. I'm going to see what's causing you all this distress, and I'm going to address that and hopefully get that to stop while getting you what you need. That would be what is going on with the protest from my perspective. Now, I'm not telling other parents to say that. I'm saying to have the conversation, ask them how they feel, and then share what content that you think they need to be able to see things the way that you feel that they should see them.
Mm-hmm. I really like the analogy of the tantrum, because any age can remember that and feel that, even though they might hopefully not be projecting in that way at 16, 17 years old. They still know how that feels.
Yeah.
So that's what gets attention to the cause, like what's causing that feeling, and especially as a society, what's causing that feeling. And if you don't do anything with that, no one's going to see that and act on it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Chris, I really appreciate, and I go back between Chris and Rob if anyone's noticed that. So there's multiple names that Chris uses. We're going to be posting this live session on our Instagram stories. It's obviously being saved on Facebook. If we didn't get to your comments, because I know there was a lot there and I was trying to manage that and stay engaged in the conversation at the same time, we're definitely gonna post responses in the grid and on some Facebook posts. We'll think about if people are interested in kind of an encore, maybe focusing on younger teens or really honing in on those strategies. Because I know we talked about, using types of questioning and reflecting what we hear, but sometimes that can be difficult to do if you're not more versed on what those things are. So definitely follow both of us, Dr. Jen _Teen Speak for Parents and Therapy by Rob on Instagram. And we thank you for being part of this change. We're super excited to have the opportunity to talk with everyone and kind of share, and especially hear what Chris's experiences have been and some of the things that we need to think about as a whole.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate you hosting this. I think it's an important conversation. It's impossible to have it all in 30 minutes. Yeah. I see a lot of different comments, but I'm definitely open to having another, live event where we can talk more about some of the stuff that we didn't get a chance to address. And we will reach out to those who've submitted questions. We won't ignore those. A lot of very important questions that we would like to try to provide some guidance on where we think that we can. But like I said, I appreciate you hosting this. I think it was very well needed, and it's important during this current climate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.